I never thought my world could change in just one afternoon. But that's exactly what happened. One moment, I was still Elizabeth Parker, a 12-year-old girl living in a warm two-story home with my parents, a family I believed was solid. The next moment, I was left with nothing but the shattered pieces of a broken dream. My parents called me down to the living room after dinner. They both sat on the couch, an oddly large distance between them. On the coffee table, 2 cups of steaming coffee sat untouched. My heart pounded. I didn't know what was happening, but something told me it wasn't good. "Elizabeth, sit down," my mother spoke, her voice so gentle that it made me uneasy. I obediently sat in the chair across from them, gripping the hem of my nightgown tightly. My father cleared his throat, his eyes avoiding mine. "We have something important to tell you." My mother placed her hand over mine, a comforting gesture that felt hollow. "We've decided to get a divorce." I blinked. A long silence stretched between us. The words echoed in my mind, but I couldn't comprehend them. Divorce? No way. "No, no, that's not possible," I stammered, staring at them, waiting for a smile or a joke. But my father just sighed, and my mother tightened her grip on my hand. "Sometimes, people just don't belong together anymore," she continued, her voice soft but distant. "We still love you. But we won't be living in the same house anymore." My stomach twisted. Everything felt like it was collapsing. "Why?" I asked, my voice so small I could barely hear it myself. My father took a deep breath, as if gathering the courage to say the next words. "Because we've met other people." I froze. That statement knocked the air out of my lungs. It wasn't just a divorce. They had already found someone else. He continued, his voice forced into calmness. "I'll be moving out next week. You'll be staying with your mom, but you can visit me on weekends." My mother nodded, her eyes shining with an emotion I couldn't name. "My new partner has 2 daughters, just a little younger than you. You'll have sisters to play with, sweetheart." I shot up from my seat, my heart pounding so loudly I could hear it in my ears. "No, I don't want sisters, I don't want anyone else, I just want my family back the way it was." My parents exchanged a look. A silent understanding that I wasn't a part of. That was the moment I realized. They had been preparing for this for a long time. I was the only one left blindsided, hurt, and lost. I turned and ran, my tears spilling before I even reached my room. The bedroom door slammed shut behind me, but I could still hear their voices downstairs. They were discussing how to arrange my life, as if I were just a piece of furniture to be moved elsewhere. I looked around my room, at the family photos still hanging on the walls, the birthday gifts from both of them. They had once been proof that I belonged to a happy family. But now, they were nothing more than fragments of a broken past. And worst of all, I knew this was only the beginning. My father moved out that weekend. No warm farewell, no promises for the future. Just a rushed hug at the doorway, and the same repeated phrase, "You'll be okay." But I wasn't okay. It didn't take long for my mother to start her new life. Less than 2 months later, she married Richard, the man she once called her new partner. A small, simple ceremony, without me there. When they returned from their honeymoon, I didn't just have a stepfather. I had 2 stepsisters, Madison and Haley. The first time I met them, I tried to be friendly. When my mom led them into the living room, I forced an awkward smile. "Hi, I'm Elizabeth, do you need help unpacking?" Madison, the older one by a year, just raised an eyebrow at me as if I'd said something stupid. Haley, a year younger, folded her arms and smirked. "No need, this is our house now, we'll set it up ourselves." Her words cut through me like a blade. This was my house. At least, it used to be. In the following days, I realized that my presence was nothing but an inconvenience. My mother was busy with her new family, and Madison and Haley treated me like an outsider. They took my clothes without asking. One afternoon, I came home from school to find Madison wearing my favorite sweater. "You're wearing my sweater," I exclaimed. Madison shrugged, still scrolling through her phone. "Mom said I could borrow it, don't be so dramatic." I turned to my mother for support, but she just smiled. "Elizabeth, you should learn to share. You're sisters now, what's the big deal?" I bit my lip, swallowing down the frustration rising in my chest. But the final straw came on my 13th birthday. I had hoped for at least a little recognition from my mom, a small cake, a simple birthday wish. But she forgot. Not because she was busy with work, but because she was out shopping with Madison and Haley. I knew this because when they returned, both stepsisters had brand new iPhones in their hands. "What's this?" I asked, my heart pounding. "Oh," my mother said, taking off her sunglasses as if it was nothing. "I used the money I had saved for your birthday to buy Madison and Haley phones. They need them to stay in touch with us." It felt like a punch to the chest. I hadn't asked for anything, just a simple acknowledgement of my birthday. But she didn't even remember me. That night, I cried myself to sleep. I thought things would be better when I visited my dad, but that turned out to be another nightmare. My father now lived with Linda, his new wife, a woman I had met exactly once before they got married. She was pregnant. And apparently having a biological child was far more important than I was. Worse, I had to share a room with Ethan, Linda's 10-year-old son, who found great pleasure in tormenting me. One night I woke up with a strange sensation on my face. When I opened my eyes, a huge spider was crawling across my nose. I screamed, jumping out of bed, my heart pounding wildly. The bedroom light flicked on and there was Ethan, standing in the doorway, grinning. "It's just a toy, chill out." Linda appeared, her expression irritated. "What's going on?" I gasped for breath, trying to steady myself. "He put a fake spider on my face while I was sleeping." Linda crossed her arms, looking unimpressed. "Elizabeth, you're overreacting, it was just a joke." I turned to my father, hoping he would defend me. But he just stood there, silent. I couldn't believe it. "Dad, don't you think this is too much?" He sighed, avoiding my eyes. "Ethan is just a kid. You don't need to overreact like this." Overreact? I felt like I was invisible in this house. No one cared how I felt. And that was when I realized I didn't belong here anymore. I slowly came to understand one thing. In this house, I had no rights at all. Madison and Haley didn't just take my clothes without asking, they also barged into my room whenever they pleased. One day, I came home from school and found Madison rummaging through my drawer, holding the silver bracelet my dad had given me for my 10th birthday. "Put that down." I rushed toward her, snatching the bracelet from her hand. Madison pouted. "You don't have to be so upset, Elizabeth, it's just a bracelet." I glared at her. "It's not yours." Haley stepped into the room, folding her arms. "Calm down, you're always so tense. No wonder Mom doesn't like you anymore." I froze. A sharp pain spread through my chest. Mom doesn't like me anymore. I already knew that, but hearing Haley say it out loud made it unbearable. I turned away, trying to ignore them. But 2 days later, things got much worse. That evening I went downstairs to get a glass of water and heard laughter coming from the living room. Madison and Haley were sitting on the couch, while Mom and Richard chatted and laughed with them. I stood there, feeling like a stranger in my own home. No one noticed I was there. Or maybe they just didn't care. I turned to leave, but as I stepped onto the stairs, I heard a crash from the kitchen. Rushing back, I froze at the sight of my favorite mug. The one with the cartoon character I had cherished since I was little. Shattered on the floor. Madison and Haley stood nearby, feigning innocence. "Elizabeth, you broke your mug," Haley said, blinking at me with fake sweetness. I clenched my fists. "I didn't break it. You did." Madison crossed her arms and shrugged. "Mom? Elizabeth just got mad and smashed her cup." I spun around, looking at Mom. "I didn't. You have to believe me." Mom looked at me, but there was no doubt in her eyes about Madison and Haley's accusation. Richard stood up and stepped toward me. "Elizabeth, you can't throw a tantrum every time things don't go your way." "I didn't do it," I shouted, my voice filled with desperation. Richard sighed and, without warning, grabbed my arm and dragged me toward the hallway. "We're settling this right now." I struggled, but he was much stronger than me. Before I could process what was happening, Richard had opened the storage room at the end of the hall and shoved me inside. Click. The door slammed shut. Darkness swallowed me whole. I pounded on the door. "Open the door, let me out!" I could hear Madison and Haley giggling outside. "Elizabeth?" Haley's voice cooed through the crack in the door, sickeningly sweet. "Did you know this room is full of spiders?" I froze. "Big hairy ones," Madison added. "They love crawling out at night." I held my breath. I knew they were just trying to scare me. But the thick darkness and the musty air made it hard to breathe. I curled up in the corner, trying not to cry. Time passed. An hour. 2. No one came to let me out. No one cared. Mom didn't stand up for me. She didn't even check if I was okay. By the time Richard finally opened the door the next morning, I just stared at him with empty eyes. Mom stood behind him, arms crossed. "I hope you've learned to control your temper." I wasn't angry anymore. I just felt hollow. Without a word, I stepped out of the storage room, walked straight to my bedroom and closed the door. And that was the moment I understood. I wasn't my mother's daughter anymore. I was just an unwanted guest in this house. After that night, I stopped trying. I stopped trying to please Mom. I stopped trying to get along with Madison and Haley. I stopped trying to feel like I belonged. I began avoiding everyone, spending most of my time at school or locked in my room. But no matter how much distance I tried to create, I never felt safe. Whenever I was home, Madison and Haley still taunted me, still took my things without asking. Mom remained indifferent, treating me like I was invisible. And Richard grew stricter, looking for any excuse to punish me. I needed an escape. And I found it at Aunt Charlotte's house. Aunt Charlotte was my dad's sister, a woman in her 40s with neatly tied brown hair and warm eyes. She was an elementary school teacher and lived with her husband. Uncle Daniel, a doctor. I had never been particularly close to them before. But as I started looking for ways to avoid home, I found myself at their doorstep. The first time I went, Aunt Charlotte opened the door and looked at me with concern. "Elizabeth? What are you doing here by yourself?" I hesitated, unsure of what to say. But when she gently pulled me inside, handed me a warm glass of milk, and asked me what was wrong in her soft voice, I felt my heart break open. I told her everything. About Madison and Haley, about Mom and Richard, about the dark storage room they locked me in. Aunt Charlotte didn't say anything for a long time, just held my hand tightly. But her eyes were filled with anger and sorrow. From that day on, I started spending more and more time at her house. At first, I would only visit for a few hours after school. But soon, I began staying overnight, and before long I was spending entire weeks there. Aunt Charlotte and Uncle Daniel didn't just welcome me. They treated me like their own daughter. Aunt Charlotte asked about my day at school, Uncle Daniel helped me with my math homework. Every night at dinner they set an extra plate for me without needing to ask. And most importantly, they listened to me. They cared about me. I no longer felt invisible. One day, after I had been staying with Aunt Charlotte for nearly 2 weeks, something unexpected happened. I was sitting in the living room when there was a knock at the door. Aunt Charlotte opened it, and I stiffened when I saw my homeroom teacher. "Ms. Jenkins." Mrs. Jenkins looked at me in surprise. "Elizabeth? You're here?" I froze. She turned to Aunt Charlotte. "I visited Elizabeth's mother's house today to check in, but she said the girl was staying with her father. When I called Mr. Parker, he said she was with her mother." Aunt Charlotte squeezed my hand, then looked Miss Jenkins straight in the eye. "Elizabeth has been staying here for the past 2 weeks." Mrs. Jenkins looked at me with concern. Elizabeth, do you want to go back home? I didn't hesitate for even a second. Miss Jenkins gave a small nod and then pulled out her phone. I think I need to report this to Child Protective Services. Everything happened quickly after that. Within days, my case was taken to court. Mom and Dad were both summoned, but not to fight for custody of me. Rather, to explain why neither of them had actually been taking care of me. I sat in the courtroom, listening to them argue. But they weren't arguing over who would take care of me. They were arguing over who wouldn't have to. He should stay with you. Mom crossed her arms, her voice cold. I have a new family now. Dad grimaced. I'm about to have a newborn. I can't take care of a teenager. I felt like a discarded object, tossed back and forth between them. Until a firm, steady voice rang out in the courtroom. If Elizabeth cannot stay with either of her biological parents, then we would like to adopt her. I turned around. Aunt Charlotte and Uncle Daniel were standing there. I widened my eyes, stunned. Aunt Charlotte continued, her voice clear. Elizabeth has been living with us for some time. We want to give her a stable home. A real family. Uncle Daniel nodded. We love her. And we can provide the best care for her. They presented financial documents and legal paperwork proving they were fully capable of taking me in. The judge looked at me, his voice softening. Elizabeth, you're old enough to have a say in this. Who do you want to live with? I didn't even have to think. I want to stay with Aunt Charlotte and Uncle Daniel. I saw my biological parents exhale in relief. They didn't even bother to protest. That told me everything I needed to know. As I walked out of the courthouse that day, for the first time in a long while, I felt light. Aunt Charlotte pulled me into a tight hug, her voice thick with emotion. You're safe now, Elizabeth. I rested my head against her. I knew that from this day forward, I was no longer unwanted. I had finally found my real family. After being legally adopted by Aunt Charlotte and Uncle Daniel, I finally had a real family. For the first time in my life, I no longer felt uneasy coming home after school. No longer treated as an outsider, no more constant arguments, no more unfair punishments. I had my own room, family dinners, and people who genuinely cared about me. Under their care, I gradually regained my confidence and motivation to study. I devoted most of my time to school. Aunt Charlotte, as a teacher, helped me improve my grades. Uncle Daniel, a doctor, inspired my love for science and medicine. But the person who truly made me dream of becoming a doctor was Helen, Uncle Daniel's mother. Helen had been a brilliant surgeon, though she was now retired and living in a small house nearby. I still remember the first time I met her. She looked at me with warmth in her eyes, then suddenly said, "You have the eyes of someone destined for greatness." I laughed, not believing her, but she was serious. You've been through a lot, Elizabeth. Those who have endured deep wounds are often the best at healing others. Have you ever considered becoming a doctor? I never had before. But from that day on, the idea took root in my mind. I began spending more time with her. She taught me about the human body, about the surgeries she had performed, about the many patients she had helped throughout her career. Every time she spoke, I felt my heart fill with passion and purpose. I wanted to help people. I wanted to become a doctor. With the unwavering support of Aunt Charlotte, Uncle Daniel, and Helen, I became an outstanding student. By my senior year of high school, I applied to prestigious medical schools. And then, I received a full scholarship to one of the top medical programs. The day I got my acceptance letter, I cried like a child. I had done it. I had finally left my painful past behind, and was stepping into my future. Aunt Charlotte hugged me tightly, tears glistening in her eyes. We're so proud of you, Elizabeth. Helen took my hand, her voice steady and warm. Remember, just because a child was once abandoned, doesn't mean they will be abandoned forever. You've built your own life, and now, you can change the lives of others. 3 years passed in a blur. I lost myself in endless study sessions, sleepless nights at the hospital as an intern, and exhausting shifts under the relentless pressure of medicine. But I never gave up. because I knew I was on the right path. Then one day, amid the chaos of my long shifts, I received a call from Aunt Charlotte. Her voice trembled. Elizabeth. Helen. She passed away this morning. I stood frozen in the hospital hallway, feeling the ground collapse beneath me. I couldn't believe it. She had promised to be at my graduation. The days that followed were filled with profound grief. Helen had changed my life, had given me my greatest passion. But I had never gotten the chance to tell her how much she meant to me. After the funeral, we gathered at the lawyer's office for the reading of her will. I assumed she had left her assets to medical charities, because that was what she had always cared about the most. But when the lawyer opened the file and began reading, the room fell into complete silence. All of my assets, including my home, savings, and stock investments, totaling $1,800,000, will be inherited by my granddaughter, Elizabeth Parker. My eyes widened in shock. I turned to Aunt Charlotte and Uncle Daniel, but they didn't look surprised. Aunt Charlotte simply smiled, tears streaming down her face. She believed in you, Elizabeth. And she wanted to secure your future. I was speechless. Helen had loved me enough to leave everything she had, to me. Not because I had asked for it, not because she needed anything in return, but because she truly believed I deserved it. For the first time in years, my heart overflowed, not with pain, but with immeasurable gratitude. I had no intention of telling anyone about Helen's inheritance. But somehow, my biological parents found out. Just a week after the legal proceedings were finalized, my phone started ringing with unknown numbers. My voicemail overflowed with messages, and when I checked them, every single one was from my biological mother, Jennifer. Elizabeth, I miss you so much. Can we meet? I want to apologize for everything in the past. Please give me a chance. Your family has always loved you. We're still family, you know that. I scoffed as I read her messages. Love? Family? If she truly loved me, she wouldn't have treated me like an unwanted burden in my own home. If I had really been her family, she wouldn't have so easily handed me off like I was a problem to be rid of. Still, I decided to meet her. Just once, to see what she really wanted. When I stepped into her house, nothing had really changed. The living room was still filled with pictures of Madison and Haley, yet not a single photo of me. Mom rushed over and hugged me, but the embrace was stiff, unfamiliar. Richard stood behind her with a forced smile. Madison and Haley sat on the couch, watching me with calculating eyes. Elizabeth, you look wonderful, Mom beamed, grabbing my hands. I'm so glad you came, I've missed you so much. I remained still, not responding. After some time playing the role of a caring mother, she sighed and got to the real reason I was there. Elizabeth, I know you're very busy, but as you can see, this house is getting old. We really need to get some repairs done. I said nothing, just stared at her. Richard nodded. That's right. The heating system has issues, and Madison and Haley are both heading to college soon, and tuition is getting more expensive. Madison smiled, her voice dripping with false sweetness. Elizabeth, I know you're a good person. You wouldn't let your family struggle, would you? Family? I let out a cold laugh. How interesting, I said calmly. Because 3 years ago, when I needed a family, none of you were there. The atmosphere in the room immediately grew heavy. Mom quickly intervened. Elizabeth, don't say that. We've always loved you. No. I cut her off. You only love my money. Madison and Haley couldn't hide their irritation, and Richard's expression turned sour. Mom still tried to cling to her act. Elizabeth, we can start over. I stood up, looking her straight in the eye. We ended a long time ago. Then I walked away without looking back. I thought that would be the end of it. But not long after, my biological father, Robert, also reached out. Unlike Mom, he didn't bother with fake pleasantries. The moment I picked up the phone, his voice was direct and calculated. Elizabeth, I heard you received a large inheritance. I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath. Is that so? Funny how you suddenly care about my life. He ignored my sarcasm and continued. You know, your little sister, Lily, is very bright. We want to send her to a prestigious private school, but tuition is quite expensive. Can you help? I let out a dry chuckle. My little sister? Lily is your sister, he emphasized. You can't just abandon her. I laughed, this time louder. Abandon her? Have you forgotten who abandoned me first? His patience started to wear thin. Elizabeth, I'm not asking for much. This is your responsibility. If you refuse, your stepmother and I may consider legal action to claim a portion of that money. You owe us. I was silent for a few seconds before replying in a calm, steady voice. No, you're mistaken. I don't owe anyone anything. I paused, making sure he grasped every word. I am no longer your daughter. I have legal parents now, people who truly love me. And you? You gave up on me a long time ago. Elizabeth, you. I hung up and blocked his number immediately. I had once craved my biological parents' acknowledgement. I had once wanted them to love me, to see me, to regret abandoning me. But now, I no longer cared. Looking at my real family, Aunt Charlotte, Uncle Daniel, and the memories of Helen, I knew I didn't need my biological parents anymore. They had become strangers. And I was finally free of them. My life finally fell into place. I no longer had to worry about demanding phone calls or manipulative messages from my biological parents. I had blocked them all, cutting off that painful past entirely. Now, I had my real family. Aunt Charlotte, Uncle Daniel, the beautiful memories of Helen, and a promising future in medicine. My eyes sparkled with excitement. The memories of my Aunt Charlotte, Uncle Daniel, the beautiful memories of Helen, and a promising future in medicine. I thought I would never hear from anyone from my past again. Until one day, an unknown number flashed on my phone screen. I hesitated for a moment, then pressed the answer button. Elizabeth? I frowned. The voice sounded familiar, but I couldn't place it immediately. Who is this? I asked. There was a small, awkward chuckle on the other end. You probably don't remember me. I'm Jake. Jake? I froze. A strange feeling washing over me. Jake, the son of my father's wife. The boy who once put a fake spider on my face while I was sleeping. The boy who laughed as I screamed in terror. The boy I had once despised. Why was he reaching out to me now? I remained silent for a few seconds before finally speaking. What do you want? Jake sighed. I know this is sudden, but I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. The words shocked me so much that I nearly dropped my phone. Sorry? I repeated, my voice full of doubt. Yeah? For everything. Jake's voice was slow, careful. I know what I did back then was terrible. I was just a stupid kid trying to impress my stepmother and dad. But looking back, I realize I was awful. I didn't know what to say. Jake continued. I don't expect you to forgive me right away. I don't want to carry this guilt anymore. And I think you deserve a real apology. I took a deep breath. I had always assumed that everyone in my old family was the same. Selfish, cruel, and only interested in using me. But Jake's voice didn't sound like any of them. It sounded genuine. How long did it take you to realize this? I asked, my tone still cold. Jake let out a soft laugh. Probably a few years. But it took me until now to have the courage to say it. I wasn't sure how to feel. Part of me still resented everyone who had ever hurt me. But another part of me felt relieved to hear someone finally admit their mistakes. All right, I said slowly. Thank you for apologizing. Jake sounded surprised. So you don't hate me enough to block my number immediately? I chuckled. Not yet, but don't expect too much. Jake laughed lightly. I get it. So, do you want to grab a coffee sometime? Not to make excuses, just if you ever want to talk. I thought for a moment. Maybe I didn't have to forgive him right away. but maybe I could give Jake a chance to prove he wasn't the same kid he used to be. Fine, I said. But if you mention the fake spider even once, I'm leaving. Jake laughed loudly. I promise. And just like that, one of the most unexpected meetings of my life began. Years later, I stood on the stage of my medical school, my hands trembling as I accepted my diploma. I had done it. From a girl abandoned by her biological parents, I had become Dr. Elizabeth Parker. I glanced into the audience. Aunt Charlotte and Uncle Daniel sat in the front row, their eyes glistening with tears. They had been there for me, through my darkest days, lifting me up with unconditional love. And next to them was Jake. Yes, Jake. We had become real friends. He was no longer the mischievous kid who once played cruel pranks on me. He was a grown man. Kind, genuine, and someone who truly cared about me. Perhaps the most unexpected twist in my life was finding a friend in the very family I once wanted to forget. After the ceremony, they all rushed up to embrace me. We are so proud of you, Elizabeth, Aunt Charlotte said, her voice thick with emotion. Jake grinned. So, Dr. Parker is officially going to start making money now. Feel like treating me to a meal? I laughed, shaking my head. Do you have any idea how little resident doctors make? But fine. I'll buy you 1 cup of coffee. Everyone burst into laughter. For the first time in my life, I felt complete. My life had entered a new chapter. I started my medical residency at a major hospital, working long shifts, saving the lives of patients I had never met before. But no matter how busy I became, I never forgot everything I had been through. One day, during a short break between shifts, I received a text from Jake. Do you remember Lily? I frowned. Lily? Lily was my half-sister, my father's youngest daughter. I had only seen her briefly when I visited his house all those years ago. Back then, she was just an 8-year-old girl with curious eyes and a high-pitched voice. I hadn't thought about her since cutting ties with my father. I texted back, "What about her?" Jake responded immediately. Lily is really smart. She loves books and studying, but Dad and his wife don't care about her. I heard they're struggling financially, so they have no plans to send her to a better school. A bitter feeling crept into my chest. Lily had nothing to do with any of this. She didn't deserve to be neglected. She didn't deserve to be treated like a burden. I took a deep breath and typed back. Can you help me get in touch with her? I met Lily at a small cafe near my hospital. She had grown taller, but her eyes still held that same curiosity and eagerness. Elizabeth, Lily squealed the moment she saw me. I smiled. Hey Lily, how have you been? She nodded, then suddenly lowered her gaze, her voice turning quiet. Jake said you wanted to see me. I looked at her for a moment before speaking honestly. He told me you're a great student. Lily blushed. I love studying. But Dad and Mom said I don't need to go to a good school because it's too expensive. I clenched my fists. History was repeating itself. But this time, I could do something to change it. I smiled at Lily. Would you like to go to a better school? Her eyes lit up. Yes, but... She bit her lip. I don't have the money. I placed my hand over hers. I'll help you. Lily's eyes widened. Really? I nodded firmly. I set up a private education fund for Lily, ensuring she would have the opportunity to study in a better environment, free from neglect and financial struggles. Something I had never been given. Not for my biological father. Not to fix a broken family that no longer existed. But because an innocent child deserved a better future. A year later, I stood in front of Aunt Charlotte's house, reflecting on how far I had come. I was no longer the weak Elizabeth Parker I once was. I had overcome everything, found a real family, built a career I was passionate about, and created a life I could be proud of. I used to think my past would haunt me forever. But now, looking back, I only saw a journey that had shaped me into the person I was today. I had found true happiness. And this time, I knew I would never lose it again. Elizabeth Parker's story is proof that family isn't just about blood. It's about the people who truly love and care for us. From an abandoned child, she rose above her struggles, built a better life, became a doctor, and helped those in need. Painful pasts don't define us, it's how we face and overcome them that shapes who we are. Happiness doesn't come from what we've lost, but from what we create for ourselves. What do you think about Elizabeth Parker's story? Do you relate to her journey? If you were in her situation, what would you do? Share your thoughts below. And don't forget to follow the channel for more stories about family, life, and valuable lessons.